Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, Robert.
God bless. Baruch Hashem, thank you.
Baruch Hashem.
Okay. Okay, it looks like we're on bet over here. So it says Cheresh Shoteh Katan. You have these three categories, which is the deaf mute, and the minor child. And Shoteh means like he's retarded. אפילו הגיע לחינוך אינם מוציאים אחרים ידי חובתן. So it says even if they are at the age of chinuch, which means that they're already 6 or 7 years old, age of training, they still cannot fulfill the obligation of the adult. Rabbi Yehuda machshir bekatan, and Rabbi Yehuda says, right, when it comes to katan, it's okay, you can do that. So that's the language of the Tur. Says the Bet Yosef, Mishnah beperek shenit Megillah. You have the Mishnah in the second perek of Megillah, Yutet Amud Bet, Hakol ksherim lekot et Megillah. Everybody's kosher to read the Megillah, chutz micheresh shoteh bekatan, except these three categories. Rabbi Yehuda machshir bekatan. Rabbi Yehuda is allows with katan, with a child. But katvat Tosfot says Tosfot, de'al kochach bekatan she'igia lechinuch ma'ireh. We're talking about a child who already is at the age of training. Because if it's not so, my time with Rabbi Yehuda, why would Rabbi Yehuda say, right, that he can fulfill the obligation of the adults? If you're going to tell me if so, then what's the reason of the rabbis? Since the reading of the Megillah is from the rabbis, lete derabanan umapik derabanan. So let the rabbinical obligation come and fulfill the obligation of another rabbinical obligation. Like it says in this perek in Brachot Chav Amud Bet, ben mevarech leaviv, regarding a son, blessing for the father, as we already mentioned before. Af api shehu katan, even though he's katan, he's a child. Ve'yotze bebirkato, and he does fulfill the obligation with his blessing. So there, it says that we're talking about that he ate only a small size, which is only rabbinically obligated, as opposed to, being satiated, which would be an obligation from the Torah. Okay, good. And then comes, that the child, which is also the obligation is from the rabbis, and he fulfills the obligation. So it says we can say the same thing here. So it says, but they already answered this question, and they said that it doesn't resemble the reading of the Megillah, because when it comes to reading the Megillah, there is no obligation of big dolim, even with adults, only from the rabbis. But katan eno mechuyav elam b'derabanan, and the katan, the minor, the child, is only obligated from the rabbis. B'shar mitzvot, with other mitzvot. But gadol leka elachad derabanan. When it comes to gadol, when it comes to an adult, it's only one rabbinical. It's only one rabbinical obligation. Velo ate tered derabanan umapik chad derabanan. So as we already mentioned, one time, that two rabbinical obligations will not come and fulfill the obligation of one. Okay. Let's go on. So he says, Meshkatav Rabbeinu Shadata Rosh, Yifsok Katana Kama, and that which the two are taught, that the Rosh wants to paskin, he wants to rule like the Tanakama, the first opinion. Kachni then show data Rif Rambam. It seems like the Rif and the Rambam also agreed to that. Mehaditnan. That which we learned in the Mishnah, Chutz Mecheresh Kata, except the Defmi Katav says around Hai Cheresh Deacha, Afilu Bemdaber Veno Shomea. We're talking about even a case where he's talking and not hearing, right? Something tells me that we did this already, this piece. But let's just see where we are here.
Kavod Harav, I think we did.
Yeah, we did not?
I think so. Hold on. Okay.
Okay, anyway.
The katan are obligated, right? A child absolved didn't eat enough, given that it's a child. And the two rabbinical, no obligation from the Torah, nor the rabbis after blessing. Adults are obligated, yeah? One rabbinical decree.
So you're saying we did do it?
That's what I have in my notes here.
That we did it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. Okay, so then where do we get up to? That's the question.
Hold on. It says here, okay. It also mentions something about Masechet Gitin, moving forward. Do you see anything there? Someone who doesn't speak or hear, he doesn't fulfill the obligation for himself, nor others. Rabbi Yosef said, if he didn't hear the Shema, he hasn't fulfilled his obligation, or something,
Okay, what about that?
That's part of the notes that I have here.
Okay.
We don't hold like this Mishnah if the person is reading only, not fulfill his obligation.
Mm-hmm.
Hanasi says, if you read Shema and not hear, he fulfilled his obligation. Our Yosef's opinion, there's a machlok, single opinion.
I can check the Shulchan Aruch and see where we are there.
In the Shulchan Aruch, it says here. You want me to read you or no?
Just give me a second. 1 second. Yeah, it seems like we did bet. Yeah, okay, so we'll go on to Gimel.
Yes. Yeah. In summation, the Shulchan Aruch says that the Katan could be obligated for Chinuch. However, he cannot fulfill the obligation like adults. Is this correct?
I'm sorry, just give me 1 second. 1 second. Yeah, so we just did. Let me just see what Gimel says. Yeah. Gimel. Right, we did Gimel also. So let's see what's next. Yeah, so we have to go to Daled, basically.
I think in the Beit Yosef, correct?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay, so here we go. So it says, okay. So it says in Dalet, Beit Yosef, Katuv Be'orchot Chaim. It's written over there in this book, Hashomea Megillah Mimi Shehu, Mudar Hana Mimenu Yatzad Dumiyad Shofar, right? So it says that if you hear a Megillah from somebody who is, right, he made a vow not to get benefit from him. So even in a case like that, Yatsa, he fulfills obligation, Dumiyad the shofar, resembles shofar. Just like in shofar, it's the same thing. So here also the same thing. So what's the understanding here? What's the idea? The idea is like this, right? That You may think because this person made a vow not to get benefit from this person. So you may think that he cannot hear the Megillah from him because he made a vow. So comes and tells you no, that the mitzvot were not given for benefit. So therefore, this is the reason why you can fulfill your obligation with somebody like this. That's the idea. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch here. So here the same thing, right? Shulchan Aruch says, "Hashomeh Megillah mimishu mudar ana mimenu." He heard the Megillah from somebody who he's not supposed to get benefit from him. Yatsa, so he fulfills the obligation, right? And as we said, right, the reason is because the mitzvot are not given for benefit. In other words, the mitzvah is just something you do for Hashem. You don't do it for your own benefit. So therefore, in other words, it's not a physical benefit, not a tangible benefit. It's spiritual, So spiritual is not really called benefit because you're doing it for Hashem. So this is the reason why you can fulfill your obligation in this manner. Okay, any questions on that? Otherwise, we'll go on.
No.
Okay, good. So yeah, let's go to Hey. So it says Katuv Od Sham. So it's written over there. Furthermore, right in the Orchot Chaim. מקום שאין מניין, אם יש שם 4 או 5 ואחד מהם יודע מגילה ואחרים אינם יודעים. So he says, let's say you have a place where there's no minyan. And there is like 4 or 5 people there. And one of them, he says, knows the Megillah, and the other ones don't know. So what does that mean? He knows how to read, right? And the other ones don't know how to read. Echad poter et kulam. So one can fulfill the obligation of all of them. So in other words, even though you don't have a minyan, one can fulfill the obligation of the others, even though it's only like a half a minyan, 5 people, let's say. That's one thing. But he says if they know all of them how to read themselves, so then each one should read by himself. Interesting. Okay. So why is that? The reason is because since you don't have a minyan, it's not really, like a group kind of a situation. It's like individuals, 5 individuals. It's not really like a group setting, when there's no minyan. And this is the reason why, you should only have one read for the others if they don't know how to read. But if they all know how to read, it's better than for each one to go individually. That's what he's saying. Okay, let's see the Shulchan Aruch on that. Okay. So it says like this: Makom she'en minyan, place where there's no minyan, right? Im echad yodea ve'achrim enam yodim. If one knows how to read and the others don't, echad potet kulam. So then one can fulfill the obligation of all of them. Ve'im kulam yodim. But if they all know how to read, kol echad koreh liatzmo, then each one reads for himself. As we said, because these are individuals, it's not really a group. A real group is a minyan. That's what it means to say. Okay, any questions on that? Otherwise, we'll go on.
No questions.
Good. Okay. Let's see what else we got here. Okay, we got one more, Vav, right? So it says here in Vav, Yerushalmi, right? There's a Gemara Yerushalmi, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi hava machnish bene bete vekare kamehon. Right? So it says that this rabbi, what he would do is, he would gather his family members and read for them. Right? So where is this from? Bepek bet the Megillah. It's the second parak of Megillah. Interesting. Okay. Halacha hey. Okay. So what's the novel idea here, right? What's the chidush? Let's see. I don't really know what it is. Let's see Shulchan Aruch. Okay. So it says here, Minhag tov le'avi ktanim uktanot lishmoa mikra megillah. It's a good custom, right? It says that to bring the children. Okay, that's the idea, right? It's telling you that you should bring the children also. And so, if I'm not mistaken, we said, right, that you should bring the ones that are, at the age of chinuch already. That's for sure. But it seems like, he's talking here about all the ktanim, right? All the children. So let's see the Mishnah Berurah, how he understands that. Interesting. Right, so he says chinuch, right? Meaning what? That we're talking about the age of chinuch, apparently, according to this explanation of the Mishnah Berurah. Interesting. Let's see if he says anything else afterwards. So look what he says, right? He brings here the Magen Abraham that says that, don't bring like very small kids, right? Why is that? Because they mess you up, right? You can't concentrate. They start, screaming and, this and yelling and, all kinds of stuff. So, you don't want that because they distract everybody. So therefore, right, he says in Mishnah Berurah that, bring the kids, but don't bring the very small kids, they're too small. They're gonna make a problem there. Okay. Very good. So that's the end of the chapter. Now we'll go to the next chapter. So it says here in the Torah, Hakoreh Megillah Omed O Yoshev. Person reads the Megillah, right? He can do it whether he's standing or sitting. Yatsa. In other words, whether he did it standing or sitting, if he fulfills obligation. Mashma b'diavad, aval lechatchila lo ikra Yoshev. So it says implies that it's only b'diavad, in other words, after the fact. But the chatchila, right? Preferably, he should read it sitting. I'm sorry, you should not read it sitting. Just the opposite, right? So meaning what? That the person who's reading the Megillah should be standing. That's the preferred way. Okay. And then he says, right, Uvi Yerushalmi Kamar, said in Yerushalmi, Tafilu lechatchila, even the chatchila, right? He can do it sitting. Interesting. The Rambam Zal Katav, but the Rambam says, Aval lo ikra lechatchila yoshev b'tzibur. It says, but lechatchila, when you're in the community, don't read it sitting. Mipnei kevod hatzibur, because of the honor of the community. Tafilu shnayim, even if it's two people, Tafilu asar, even 10, יכולים לקרותה ביחד. They can read it together. צריך לקרותה כולה, you have to read all of it, מתוך הכתב and also from the writing. ואם קרא על פה, but if he wrote it, if he read it orally, לא יצא, they didn't fulfill obligation. So he says, Hilkach, therefore, tzarich sheteh ktuva kula lefanav. So it has to be all of it written in front of him. דווקא לכתחילה, עצם לכתחילה, אבל בדיעבד, after the fact, אם השמיט בה הסופר תיבות, if the sofer left out some words, אפילו עד חציה, even until half, הוא קרא, הקורא על פה, and the reader read it orally, יצא, he fulls obligation. אבל ביותר מחציה, אפילו אין כתובות, אלא שהם, but it says, if it's more than half, even if they're written, אלא שהם מטושטשות, even if they're written, but they're blotted out a little bit, right? Blotted out, blurry. Then nishoman nekar psula. You can't really see them very well, and then it's pasul. Okay, that's the tour.
Kabbalah Taraf blotted out, meaning that the words are not clear in the Megillah, and then he blotted out the words while he read it.
I'm saying, which word was that?
You said blotted out, right? Is
Right,
this
right. In other words, that means that the ink, is like blotted, like blurry. The ink is like, it's like, how ink is, right? It gets like, blotted, like.
Yes, with time, yes.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. Well, yeah, all kinds of things.
And
So,
in this case, it makes the Megillah unkosher or no?
what, the fact that it's blotted?
Yeah.
Well, if the majority is like that, then it's not kosher. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's see Bet Yosef. So it says Bet Yosef here. He brings the source for this. Resh Perek HaKoreh Omed, right over there in this in Ilah Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph. Katav Aran Yatsa Lav Davka. So he says the Ran, right? Not precisely the full obligation. Afilu l'chatchila nami. Ran says even l'chatchila, right? In other words, even preferably you can do it sitting. That's what he's saying. There was also other opinion we saw that it's not like that in the tour. Okay, so let's see the Shulchan Aruch.
Kabbalah Taraf, and it has to be one person that reads the entire Megillah, right? Not just like half.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that issue. But from what I remember, it doesn't have to be one person. In other words, if somebody, can't read it for some reason, somebody else can step in, and take his place. It's not really a problem.
Okay, thank you.
But of course, in general, one person reads it.
Yes.
But if there's a need to bring somebody else in, I think it's possible.
Okay.
We're gonna get to that, Bezat Hashem.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so let's see the Shulchan Aruch. Second. Okay, so says in the Shulchan Aruch, Korei Adam et Megillah ben Omed ben Yosef, right? You can read the Megillah whether it's sitting or standing. So from this language, right, and then it says Aval lo yikra b'tzibur, but you shouldn't do it in the community, Yosef, when he's sitting. Lechatchila, he shouldn't do it. Why? Because of the honor of the community. So if he's sitting at home, reading, he can do it any way he wants. But when he's in the community, there he should preferably be standing. So it says the Rama here, "Ve'asur lechazan likot et Megillah." It's forbidden for the chazan to read the Megillah ad sheomrim lo kira, until they tell him to read. So meaning what? That there's a halacha like this, When we learn the laws of prayer, I think we dealt with that, which is that when there's a chazan, right, and people want him to go up and pray, he should wait till they tell him to do so. Why is that? What's the reason why? Because this way, right, we know that he was appointed, that he got permission. But if he just goes up by himself, it looks like he's being, like arrogant, like he's going without permission, which is not nice. That's the idea. But, right, we already mentioned another thing which relates to that, which is that, if he's like an appointed chazan, he's like, he's already been hired. So he doesn't need permission, because he does it all the time. We're talking about somebody who doesn't do it all the time, and therefore, if he goes up by himself, it's considered to be like, he's being arrogant a little bit, pushy, whatever. But but if he's already been hired to be the chazan, obviously he's going to be the one who's going to read, So there's no chidush, there's no novel idea there. Okay. That's the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, let's go back to Bet Yosef. And it says here, רבנו, מה שכתב רבנו, ואפילו שניים ואפילו 10 יכולים לכתוב ביחד. Oh, okay, we gotta go back to the tour. 1 second. Right, so the tour said that even 2, even 10. So what does that mean? That they can read like 2 people together, like in unison, even 10 people. So it says you have to read all of it, and also from the writing. And from the written, right, from the writing. So we're gonna do the Bet Yosef on that. So it says Bet Yosef, Mishnah Bright Hasham, right? What's the source? The Mishnah Bright over there, Kaf Aleph Amud Bet. Afagav de Betorah en Kore ela echad Megillah. So he says, right, that When it comes to the Torah, only one person can read, the Torah, not two people or more. What does that mean? Together, in unison. When it comes to the Megillah, right, two or more can read together in unison. What's the difference? So he says, Megillah shani dechevan dechaviva leuya v'daitayu. So because they love to hear the Megillah, so they they pay attention to it, and therefore they're not going to miss it by being read by more than one person. When it comes to the Torah, the problem is that if more than one person reads in unison, they're gonna kind of like get distracted and not hear it properly. Right, and so therefore, the difference, as we said, is that when it comes to Megillah, people, are really very fond of the reading. So therefore, since they're fond, they're going to pay attention and make sure they hear everything. So this is the reason why we allow to have two or more people reading in unison. Okay, let's see the Shulchan Aruch. So it says right like this. We have to go to the next one. Right, so it says the Shulchan Aruch, afilu shnayim, afilu asara. If you have two people or 10, right, יכולים לקרוא ביחד, they can read it together in unison. ויוצאים הם משומעים מהם, and they full obligation like that, and they hear them. So yeah. Any questions on that, by the way? Okay.
No.
Okay, good. So let's go to Gimel. All right, so another thing we said is that v'tzarich likotah kula, right? Which means that you have to read the whole thing. What does that mean, read the whole thing? Obviously, you have to read the whole thing. What he means to say is that you have to read it from writing, from the written text. So it's Perek Bet Begimila. It's the second Perek of Megillah. It says, Yutet Amud Aleph, Tanan, we learn in the Mishnah, Mechan Koreh et Adam et HaMegillah, Ve'yotze ba yedeh chovato, Rabbi Meir Omer Kula, right? So it says Rabbi Meir, you got to read the whole thing. So the way I said it before was not correct. What I mean to say is like this, right? That you got to read it from from A to Z, the whole thing. In other words, you can't just like skip something there. That's what he wants to tell you here. Make sure you read from beginning to end. That's one thing. And then he says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, right, Meishudi. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you don't have to read the whole thing. Just from Ishudi, right, which is a little bit into the text already. Right, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Me'achar advarim ha'ele, right from there. Ve'yifsika ilchata ki b'gemara kedivri Omer kula. So Gemara Paskins, rules, you got to read the whole thing. So we Paskin like Rabbi Meir, so the rule is you got to read everything. Yes.
I'm sorry. When is it? I don't know if you have mentioned this, but there have been few times when we paskim like our maid, no?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Like Rabbi Meir. Usually they paskim like other rabbis or in the Gemara, no? Or it's like in favor of majority.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking, but what do you call it? But there are rules about like who we paskin like when it's a machloket.
Yes.
There are rules about this, but here we're not going by the rules. We're going. The Gemara says, right? Halachas like Rabbi Meir.
Okay. Thank you.
You know what I mean? So we're not going to the general rule, because according to the general rule, the halacha should not be like him.
Right, because it usually goes in favor of majority, no?
Yeah, it's not only majority. Even if there's the one arguing, right? The rule is that we go like Rabbi Yosef or Rabbi Yehuda, over right over Rabbi Meir. But here we go like Rabbi Meir.
Thank you.
There is really no majority here because each one is saying something else. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
It's like one and one and one. You know. So anyway, we call it halacha like Rabbi Meir, and therefore you got to read the whole thing. So then he goes on, mitoch haktav, right? Then he's whatever. But then we also said, right, you have to read it from a text. So what does that mean? You shouldn't read it from orally, right? If he read it orally, he didn't fulfill his obligation. So it says regarding that, right? The Bet Yosef Pashut Sham, right? It's obvious there, right? The Mishnah there, right? That you have to read it from the text. Otherwise, no good. Right, so then he says later on, afterwards, so therefore, it has to be written all out, like in front of you. So in other words, you have to have the whole text in front of you. Right? So he says, right, that halacha is like the one who says that you have to read, the whole thing has to be in front of you. Even according to one who says from Yeshudi, that you can read from there, you have to, right, it has to be all written out. So in other words, even if we allow you to read from later on, according to the other opinions, but it has to be everything written out. Okay, so now it tells you, right, dafka lechatchila, that's only lechatchila, but bediavad, im ishmit ba sofer tevot, if the sofer left out some words. So as we said, right, that goes according to the majority. So if the majority is written, you're good, and you can read the minority of it. You can read the minority orally, but if the majority is not written, then you got a problem, right? There's no way to fulfill the obligation like that. So regarding that, right, says the Gemara there, Yudchet Amud Bet, Tanu Rabbanan, rabbis taught, Yishmit ba sofer otiot. Let's say the sofer, the scribe, left out some letters, or psukim, or verses, v'kera'ana koreh, when the reader read them, kimeturgaman, like he just read it like orally, right, like a translator. Hamtargem yatsa, he fulfills obligation. What about if a case where, as we said, right, they're blotted out? The letters are blotted out. Right? Or they're torn up, right? So in other words, they're not legible. So it's there, but it's not legible. So it says if you can recognize the right, the trace, whatever, the script, whatever you want to call it, right? It's kosher. If it's recognizable, in other words, you can read it. It's legible. Even though it's blotted out, it's legible. It's kosher. The im lav, but if not, psula, then it's pasul. It's not legible. Lo kashya, so no difficulty. Ha bekula, ha bekisata. So one is talking about all of it, and one is talking about part of it, right? So meaning what? That if it's just a part of it which is blotted out, it's okay. But if it's all blotted out, no good, right? V'katav Rambam, says Rambam, hayu ba'otiot metushtashos. If you have right, blotted out letters, or mikraot, or torn up, im rishuman nekar, if it's recognizable, afilu hayu ruba kshira, even if it's the majority is kosher. Im en rishuman nekar, and if it's not recognizable, im haya ruba shalem kshira, if most of it is right, complete, it's kosher. Ve'im lav psula, if it's not, kosher. It seems like he explains, right, the miuta karui miktsata, that the minority minority is called part of it, beruba karui kula, and the majority is called all of it. Right, like we said in every place in Nazir, that the majority is considered like all of it. So in other words, in halacha, that's the rule, right? It's a general rule in Torah law. Okay, we go according to majority. So when you have majority, it's considered to be like you have everything. That's what we're saying. וכך הם מדברי רבנו, so that's also from the Tur, וכן כתוב באורחות חיים, also there, וכתב על זה בשם הרעה, he writes right in the name of this rabbi regarding this, והנה מילה באמצעיתה, that's talking about the middle of the Megillah, not the beginning or the end, והוא שלא תהיה חסרה עניין, and also it shouldn't be lacking like the whole, a whole theme. כתב הר"ן, says the Ran, the Tanu Rabbanan, regarding which we learned, the rabbis taught, Hishmit ba sofer otiot, that if the scribe left out some letters, psukim or verses, Hiksha Rashba asks on this question on this. Let me just see how far this goes. We're almost finished. Okay, so the Rashba asks a question. That here it implies that if it's lacking a little bit, right, the minority, it's kosher. But later on, we said the halacha is like the one who says kula, even all of it. Even according to one who says we start from Ish Yehudi, has to be written out all of it. Right? So therefore we see that if it's lacking from the beginning until Yeshudi, psula is pasul. Then ahead that granted that we say. That we need has to be all written out. Mashma the leakev nami aminan. We said this even right that it's even right. It's not kosher even b'diavad. Hachi like this. With the parchinan lekaman b'gemara. Since objected later on in the Gemara, Yud Chet Amud Bet, the katav pesuka b'kerele. So it says it means like it's written like one verse, verse by verse. Right, Vikarele umiyatza, and it says right that the full obligation. Umiyatza, and he reads it. I'm sorry, yeah, reads it. Umiyatza veha amar Rabbi Kuchelbo, but did he really full obligation? But didn't this rabbi say halacha kedivri Omer? Didn't he say that the halacha is like the one who says the kula that has to be all it? Afilu leman de amar meish Yehudi, even according to one who says that's the right ish Yehudi, tzricha sheteh ktuva kula, it has to be all written out. In front of him, and if it's true that he said lechatchila, right, by itself, he said, my kushya, what's the difficulty? He says, the Mishnah, Yud Amud Aleph, im kiven libo yatsa. It says that if he had intention, right, if he concentrated on it, he fulfilled obligation. Katane b'tiretz dehacha b'shetchilat ha-megillah b'sofa ketubah. So he says, it answers that here we're talking about where the beginning and the Megillah and the end of it, ketuvah, it's written. But it's lacking in the middle. So he says, therefore, wherever it's not, lacking the majority, kshera is kosher. The ena yiret kesefer chaser, because it's not considered to be doesn't look like it's lacking. Ela kesefer maleh, it seems like it's a full book, v'shalem, and it's complete. Sheyesh bo ta'uyot, which has mistakes. Megillah, kevan denikra igeret, and he says since the Megillah is called a letter, right? Igeret is a letter. And medaktekin ba lefasla bechach. So he says we're not so precise, we're not so right, exacting, to nullify the whole thing, to disqualify the whole thing. Aval keshechaser mimena mirosha ad ish Yehudi, but if it's lacking from the beginning to ish Yehudi, afa pi shehu miuta, even though it's a minority, yinek sefer chaser, it looks like it's lacking the book, because it's like the first part is cut out. So you have to read it from a complete book, which is the whole thing, the whole text. Okay, so let's see the Shulchan Aruch and we're done. Shulchan Aruch, tzarich likrota kula, right? You have to read the whole thing, as we said. Mitoch haktav, right? Also have to read it from the writing, right? From a written text. Ve'im kara al peh, if he read it orally, lo yatsa, he didn't fulfill his obligation. Tzarich shetehek ketuvah kula lefanav lechatchila. So he says lechatchila, the whole thing has to be written out in front of him. אבל בדיעבד, אם השמיט הסופר באמצע התיבות, if the sofer left out some words in the middle, אפילו עד חציה, even until up to 50%. וקרא מה קורא על פה, and the reader read it read orally, יצא, it falls obligation. אבל אם השמיט תחילתה עד סופה, if he left out, right, it says the beginning until the end, אפילו מיעוטה, even minority, he didn't fulfill obligation. So I'm sorry, I didn't read it right. One more time. The Rama. Says the Rama like this: אבל אם השמיט תחילתה או סופה, but if he left out the whole beginning or the whole end, אפילו מיעוטה, even if it's a minority, לא יצא, he didn't fulfill obligation. אפילו באמצע, even in the middle, he says, דווקא דלא השמיט עניין שלם. It's also right. It has to be that he didn't leave out a complete, right, the complete theme there, a complete topic, whatever. אבל ביותר מחציה, but if it's more than half, right, אפילו הן כתובות, even if they're written, אלא שהן מטושטשות, they're written, but they're blotted out, ואין רשומה ניכר, and you can't recognize the letters, פסולה, it's פסול. Okay, so if there's any questions about this, let me know, because, I read it pretty fast. So if you don't understand something, let me know. Okay, more or less, I hope we got it. Bezrat Hashem. Okay, so thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth, health, and happiness. Hashem should give you, right, a great Purim holiday, very, very joyous and, right, very blissful. Bezrat Hashem, everything is going to be good. And right, pray for our amazing soldiers, that Hashem is helping them, right, to be victorious in the war. Bezrat Hashem. And Hashem should help us, in all our ways to grow in Torah and mitzvot. Amen ve'amen. Chazak u'baruch. Laila tov.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
All the best.